I never thought a single letter could unravel generations of sacrifice. But that's exactly what happened. It arrived in a plain white envelope with a neat return address stamped in bold. Oak Valley Homeowners Association. I almost tossed it aside, figuring it was the usual nonsense about lawn maintenance or holiday decorations. But the paper inside was heavier than usual, official in a way that made my stomach twist. By the time I finished reading the first paragraph, I felt as if the floor had dropped beneath me. According to the notice, my 500-acre farm, land that had been in my family since the 1920s, was no longer mine. The HOA claimed I'd failed to resolve a series of special assessments and had defaulted under bylaws I'd never even seen. Without so much as a phone call, they had transferred ownership to a private developer. I laughed at first, out of disbelief more than humor. My taxes were current. My property had never been within HOA jurisdiction. I lived on the very edge of their suburban sprawl, a working farm surrounded by encroaching subdivisions. But somehow, through paperwork sleight of hand, they'd declared my land subject to their authority. I reread the bold sentence. Your property has been transferred to Willow Creek Development Group. I thought of my grandfather, who broke his back planting corn in these fields, long before HOA acronyms ruled the world. His words echoed in my head. This land is freedom. Don't let anyone take it from you. I called the HOA office immediately. The woman who answered, Margaret Lowell, was the president, a sharp-faced widow in her early 60s who always wore pearls and a smile that never reached her eyes. She'd only lived in Oak Valley for 5 years, but acted as though she owned the entire county. Ms. Lowell, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm, there's been a mistake. This notice says my land has been transferred to a developer. That's impossible. Her tone was syrupy but dismissive. Mr. Hanley, the documents are quite clear. You failed to comply with multiple assessments related to community development. The process followed all legal protocols. What assessments? I never received anything. Sometimes people overlook important mail, she replied smoothly. The law assumes responsibility rests with the property owner. I'm sorry, but the transfer is final. It was like talking to a wall. I hung up before my temper exploded. My hand shook as I dialed my friend Paul Reyes, a lawyer who specialized in property disputes. When I read the letter to him, he went quiet for a long moment. This isn't just a clerical error, Nate, he said finally. HOAs are abusing legal loopholes all over the state. They tack on obscure assessments, bury the notices, then fast-track foreclosures. By the time owners realize what's happening, the property is gone. He agreed to meet the next morning. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the farmhouse felt amplified. At 2 a.m., I noticed a black SUV idling down the road, headlights off. When I looked again, it was gone. Paul spread my documents across his desk the next day, frowning. See this language? Community Improvement Levy. That's how they get you. They pass vague resolutions, then apply them retroactively. It's technically legal, but completely predatory. So what can we do? I asked. Fight back, but be ready. These people play dirty. Dirty turned out to be an understatement. Within a week, I started seeing the same unfamiliar man at the diner, at the feed store, even outside the courthouse where I pulled property records. He never approached me, but his presence was constant. Then came the break-in. I returned from town to find my back door ajar. Inside, drawers were overturned, papers scattered, but nothing of real value taken, except my grandfather's journals. They had been torn to shreds and left in a pile on the floor as is to remind me that my family's past could be erased just as easily as its land. The sheriff's deputy shrugged when I reported it. Could be kids, he said, scribbling notes without much interest. I knew better. This wasn't random vandalism. It was a message. I refused to be cowed. Digging through county archives, I uncovered records of at least 6 other families who had lost property to Willow Creek Development under similarly murky circumstances. Every time, the HOA had facilitated the transfer. And every time, the president's signature, Margaret Lowell, was stamped on the paperwork. I wasn't alone. At a diner off Route 9, An elderly woman named Dorothy Mills leaned across the booth and whispered, "They did the same thing to my nephew. Seized his orchard over a supposed drainage violation. He never got the notices either. Don't stop fighting, son. They want everything." Her words steeled my resolve. I began compiling a file. Copies of deeds, assessments, auction records, testimonies. My dining room table turned into a war room. Papers spread in neat stacks, each one a piece of a puzzle that revealed the scale of the scam. One night, as I sifted through documents, there was a knock at the door. A woman I barely knew, Elena Foster, who worked in the finance department of Willow Creek, stood on my porch trembling. She shoved an envelope into my hands. "I can't keep watching this," she whispered. "They target the elderly, the ones who don't hire lawyers. Margaret gets a cut for every parcel funneled through the HOA. Be careful, they'll come after you next." Inside were printouts of emails between Lowell and the developers, outlining a strategy. Identify financially vulnerable owners, impose hidden assessments, and fast-track foreclosures. It was all there in black and white. I knew I had to act fast. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week. Word had already spread about my situation, and more residents than usual were planning to attend. The night of the meeting, the community hall was packed. Margaret stood at the podium in her blazer and pearls, smiling as though she were presiding over a church potluck. I waited until the routine business was done before rising, a folder thick with evidence under my arm. "Neighbors," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline pounding in my veins. "The HOA isn't protecting our community. It's stealing it. My farm was seized without due process, and I can prove Margaret Lowell personally profited from the transfer." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I spread the emails across a table for everyone to see. Here are communications between our HOA president and Willow Creek Development. They discuss targeting families, fabricating assessments, and rushing sales before anyone can respond. This isn't governance, it's theft. Margaret's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened to ice. "These allegations are baseless," she said smoothly. "Anyone can fabricate emails. This man simply refuses to accept the consequences of his negligence." I slammed my palm on the table. "Negligence? My taxes are paid, my records are clean, and I never received a single notice. How many others here have had assessments appear out of nowhere?" Hands went up around the room. Murmurs swayed into shouts. For the first time, Margaret looked rattled. Still, she leaned close and hissed so only I could hear. "You don't know who you're up against. Walk away before you lose more than land." Her threat only confirmed everything. The following day, Paul filed suit in county court, and suddenly the battle escalated beyond HOA meetings. Willow Creek hired a team of high-powered attorneys who descended like vultures, challenging every motion, drowning us in paperwork. They argued the assessments were legal, the notices properly posted, the auctions valid. But during discovery, the dam cracked. Elena's documents were authenticated. Financial records revealed payments from Willow Creek directly to Margaret's personal accounts. It was enough for the state attorney general to step in. The investigation widened. What had begun as one farmer's fight turned into a sweeping probe of HOA corruption across multiple counties. Subpoenas flew, federal agents got involved, and suddenly Margaret wasn't smiling anymore. When the FBI raided Willow Creek's offices, they uncovered offshore accounts, money laundering, and a paper trail of fraudulent assessments stretching back nearly a decade. More than 3,000 acres had been stolen under the guise of community development. I'll never forget the sight of Margaret being led out of her mansion in handcuffs, her pearl necklace glinting under the flashing red and blue lights. For all her polished speeches and empty reassurances, she was nothing more than a thief in designer shoes. In court, she tried to maintain her composure, but the evidence was overwhelming. Alongside her, executives from Willow Creek faced charges ranging from fraud to racketeering. Many took plea deals. Margaret refused, and the judge sentenced her to 20 years in federal prison. When the verdict was read, I felt a rush of relief so sharp it nearly knocked me off my feet. My farm was returned, along with restitution for the months of hell I'd endured. More importantly, Dozens of other families regained their stolen properties. The state passed new laws, the Lowell Act, ironically named, to prevent HOAs from seizing land through hidden assessments or obscure bylaws. I still wake some nights, heart pounding, remembering the sound of my grandfather's journals tearing under someone's hands. But when the sun rises over my fields, and I see the rows of corn stretching toward the horizon, I know the fight was worth it. This land isn't just dirt and crops, it's memory, freedom, survival. And no homeowners association, no matter how polished their bylaws, will ever take that away from me again.